Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Ultimate Minecraft Server Series. I'm your host, SamLander34. Before we get into it, we're going to answer a couple of questions from the viewers. Jericho asks, how do I download Minecraft for free even if it's not original? Well, Jericho, unfortunately what you're asking is how to download a cracked launcher, an unofficial, unlicensed copy of the software. Fortunately, we don't condone that kind of thing, so we're not going to tell you to go and search Wolfram Alpha or any of those other cracked launchers, because honestly, you'd never know what you're going to get. It could be bundled with a virus. Your safest bet is just to download an authentic copy of Minecraft. Moving on. Jaira asks, now for the gold question, how do you make an MCPE server in your phone? Now, for those who don't know, MCPE stands for Minecraft Personal Edition, or it's the version that runs on your phone, Android, iPhone, that kind of edition. Now, unfortunately, you can't run a server for those on your phone itself. You're still going to need a PC for those. However, the good news is there is a server called Nukit that allows you to run a server on your desktop where all of your friends with phones can connect into. It works a lot like the Java servers. However, it's designed solely for mobile and the Let's Play Together series. We're going to go over Nukit in a future episode, so stay tuned and we'll show you how to set up an MCPE server as well. In today's episode, we're going to learn about plugins. Now, I know we set up a few plugins for our server to protect it and to ban players and whatnot, but that only really works well for the owner because they have op permissions. Now, what are permissions? Permissions are what allow you, the user, to be able to use certain commands and to block other users from using those same commands. So we need a plugin that deals exclusively in permissions. So we're going to use Luck Perms and get that installed in the server today and set up a basic profile so that players joining the server will be able to use the protection plugins that we installed, as well as be able to play without worry of being griefed. Are you ready to go? Let's do it.
You have an idea to make Minecraft better. Are you ready? Let's build it.
Okay, other than custom programming, setting up permissions is probably the most complicated part of a server. Luckily for us, there's plugins like Luck Permissions, which wraps up permissions into a nice little bundle, makes it a lot easier for us to use. So I'm going to put the link in the description for Luck Perms. Go ahead and download that, and just like so. And we are going to pop that into our plugins directory, just like our other plugins. All right, and then we're going to reboot our server. And now we're going to reboot the server. So we're going to hit stop to turn it off, rerun the Java command to turn it back on. Okay, as you can see, Luck Perms is loading into the software. Now that everything's loaded, we can go back into Minecraft. All right, once you're in your server, all you need to do, just to make sure everything is running properly, is do the command /plugins, and it'll show you what you've got loaded. Luck Perms, Fast Async World Edit, Ban Manager, World Edit, and Grief Prevention. As you can see, Ban Manager is in red. That means there's a problem with the plugin. We're going to have to investigate that later and make sure that that's running properly. In the meantime, let's set up our permissions. First thing I want you to do is go into Luck Perms space hell to get all of the commands that you're going to be using with Luck Perms. Luck Perms is great because it essentially it simplifies creating groups and users and permissions in a very easy to use interface. Another great feature of Luck Perms is its ability to create a rank track. If you have rank progressions like you might see in a survival server, or more appropriately in a prison when you're ranking up through the prison, this permission plugin will help you do that. We're going to cover that in a later episode when we start building the prison server. In the meantime, what we want to do is start setting up permissions for our users in this server. So an example of a Luck Perms command would be the Luck Perms user command. So let's try that out. Luck Perms user, and then I'm going to put in my username, and it's going to give me all of the information for this user. And as you can see, it also shows the subcommands that you can do with the user command. So in this instance, we're going to do Luck Perms /Luck Perms user SamLander34 info. Shows you its parent groups, contextual data, It's prefix, suffix. Those will come in handy when you're setting up your chat. We'll do that in another episode as well. So let's talk about group management. When LuckPerms loads, it will create a group called default. And that is the one that is assigned to every user when they first join the server. So that is effectively the group that we're going to be managing in this video. Okay, so I'm going to do /LuckPerms group default permission info. And as you can see, default does not have any permissions set yet. So now we need to figure out what permission nodes we need to give to our users. So far we've installed a few plugins that our users are going to need access to. So I'm going to come back into Spigot and go into grief prevention and see if there are any nodes that we need to give to our users. So to find the permission nodes, you're going to want to check the documentation for the plugin. You can usually find that on the Spigot page. We're going to scroll down until we find the manual. Okay, everything is customizable. See the manual. Okay, great. So this is the grief prevention wiki. It's going to have all of the information for us, including the permissions. Fine-grained permissions control to decide exactly what you want people to be able to do. Perfect. Okay, so these in the first column are permission nodes, like griefprevention.restoreNature gives you a description of what the command does and what the command is. And in this case, we're looking to find permissions that we want to give to our players. Obviously, you don't want your players to have the ignore claims command, because then they would just be able to ignore claim and grief all they want. That is a command that you should only ever give to administrators of your system, or just keep it for yourself. Okay, we've got griefprevention.claims. This permission is granted to everyone by default and is necessary for the claims related / commands. All right, so let's start a little list of permission nodes we're going to need to give to our players. So the first one is griefprevention.claims. Griefprevention.adjust claim blocks is dangerous. You don't want players just giving themselves as many claim blocks as they want willy-nilly, so reserve that for administrators or owner as well. A good one to give your player is griefprevention.trapped. If ever they get themselves into a position where they can't get out because they're stuck in a claim, they can do /trapped and it will teleport them outside of the claim. So that's a good one. We'll add that one in as well. Other than that, I don't think there's any more plugin permissions we need to give to our players for grief prevention. Let's move on to the next plugin. Okay, as far as permissions go for our players, really the only permissions we need to give them right now are for grief prevention. So let's take the two permission nodes that we have here, go back into our server and assign them to the default group. Okay, to add a permission to a group, we're going to run the command /LuckPerms group default permission set. Now, one of the nice things about 1.13 is the tab completion. As you can see here, it is offering us all of the plugins that we can potentially use here. So if I tab on grief prevention and hit dot, it's going to pop up all of the permission nodes for this plugin. Since we know now which ones we want to use, griefprevention.claims and griefprevention.trapped, we can use tab completion to add those in. So I accidentally added grief prevention dot to it. We're going to remove that one. So I am going to go, instead of set, I'm going to say unset. And I'm just going to say grief prevention dot. Now to check our list here, we are going to go group default permission info. And it shows us that we have two nodes for defaults group, griefprevention.claims and griefprevention.trapped. Great. After I was done filming last night, I came back in and used the admin claim tool to make sure that nobody could come in and mess with the spawn. So it's protected from new players now. As you can see, I have a 241 by 202 or 48,682 claim blocks in use to protect this castle. But no new player is going to be able to come in and mess with it. Also, I used the smooth brush, as I showed you in the last video, to kind of smooth out the terrain around the castle, and as you can see, it's much nicer. Players will be able to get back out into the wild, no problem. So right now, I can effectively open this server to players. However, there's going to be a problem with where they start. the spawn point for this game is set kind of farther away, because you remember we kind of flew around to see where a good place to put the spawn was. So new players coming into the game would start in the forest, not in this castle. So how do we fix that? Another thing that we want to do before we actually let players come in is configure our plugins such that they operate the way we want them to. For example, when a new player comes onto this server right now, default settings of grief prevention, they're only being given 100 claim blocks. Now, that will only give you enough space for a 10 by 10 claim. That's not nearly enough. I think new players ought to be able to use at least 2 chunks worth of space. So just to illustrate what a chunk is, I'm going to go into my world edit here, and I'm going to select 1 space, and since a chunk is 16 by 16, I'm going to expand by 15 because I've already got 1, and then I'm going to expand by 15 the other way, and I'm going to do walls white. So this is about the space of a chunk, 16 by 16. New players ought to be able to come in and be able to do that and have about twice that area. So here's another world edit command. Please be careful with this one because it is very dangerous. It's called the stack command. In your region, when you stack it, essentially you can take a copy of it and stack it however many times that you say. So I have this box selected here minus this side because we already have it selected on that side, and I'm just going to say / stack 1. And as you can see, it created the other side of the box. So this is roughly 2 chunks, and I think that is probably enough space to start with. Instead of 100 claim blocks, how many blocks do we have here? So to figure out how many blocks there are in 2 chunks, we know that a chunk is 16 by 16, so I'm going to use World Edit's calc function to do a quick little calculation here. So we know that there 16 by 16 is 256 blocks, and we're going to times that by 2 for 2 chunks, and that gives us 512. So we know we want our players to start with 512 claim blocks. In order to edit that, what we're going to do is we're going to go into our server folder, we're going to go into the grief prevention data folder, and under config, we are going to open that with Notepad or Notepad++. You can open it with whatever you like. I happen to like Notepad++. And this is the configuration file for grief prevention. As you can see, there's a ton of settings. The one we're really interested in right now is how many blocks do they start with. Right now it says 100. We're going to change that to 512. So how many claim blocks should a player accrue per hour? So roughly if they play for 1 hour, they get an extra 10 by 10 space. That's a little low. I'm going to say 150, I think. And if it's too slow, we can always increase it later. So max secured claim blocks. How big or how many spaces do you want them to be able to gain naturally? So I think since this is going to be our survival server and we're going to have a ranking system where as you rank up, you're given a lot more claim blocks, I think we can keep this capped at 2,000. If players aren't willing to put in the work to rank up in the system, then really I think, well, it's 2 chunks is 512 times roughly 4, so that's roughly 8 chunks worth of space. That's plenty enough to build on. Okay, other features in the configuration file are what happens when a player doesn't play on your server. That's called an expiration, and according to this, days inactive 60, except for when the owner has total claim blocks 10,000 or has bonus claim blocks of 5,000. So what this is saying is that the claim will expire and disappear if they don't come on within 2 months, which is great. It gives other players an opportunity to come in and take their stuff. And this exception here basically says if you've got a really long-term player, a really loyal player, and you don't want their claim to disappear, and you know they've got your top rank, they've got like 100,000 claim blocks, well, they would fall under this exception and their claim wouldn't disappear because they've got that level of seniority. So setting the maximum number of claims per player would be evil if you set it to 1, because then they could only ever claim 1 space. But at the same time, if you make this number too high or unlimited, it's very possible for them to make claims all over the world and make a mess of things. So use your own discretion. I've never really restricted my players in the past. I've been able to handle the messes that have been made. So the big setting I wanted to change right now is the number of initial claim blocks before I start letting players come on. That's been set and saved. And the next time we restart the server, this change will take effect. I highly recommend that you go through these configuration files line by line. And if you don't understand what a configuration item does, look it up in the manual to see what it does. This is the only true way of getting mastery over plugins and being able to truly configure your server. It does take a little bit of work, it does take a little bit of time, but ultimately it'll be worth it and will make you a better owner. We want to make sure that our players start in the main square instead of out in the forest. So we need to be able to have a plugin that is going to determine where they're going to start in the game. And so let's take a look at Spigot and see what we can find. Okay, this looks promising. What we're going to do is go back into our plugins folder. We're going to download this SetSpawn 2.1. As you can see, the version supported is here, 1.13. We're going to hit keep and drop that in. Now there's a really great plugin called CMI, and it has a ton of great features and commands to make your server awesome. Problem is it costs 15 euro on the Spigot store, so if you're not willing to spend that on a management plugin, that's totally fine. Generally, you can find smaller plugins like SetSpawn that can emulate, that can take care of some of those commands for you, some of the most essential ones like setting a spawn so that players, when they come in, they come into your main area as opposed to out in the woods. So now that we've got that installed, we are going to restart our server, stop, and rerun that command again. So while our server is starting, what we can do is go and read the documentation on this new plugin to see if we need to give our players any kind of permission nodes. So permission spawn.set, spawn.reload, spawn.spawn allows you to go to the spawn. That, I think, is the only one that we're going to need to give to our players. So we're going to add that on our list of nodes. Okay, commands set spawn, spawn, and SS reload. /spawn is effectively the only command that they're going to be interested in. Set spawn is the one that we're going to need to set where they're going to land. But in the meantime here, our server should be back and running. We're going to go in and set the final permission node to the default group. And then we're going to set our spawn, and then we technically can open up the server for play. There's still a lot of work to go, but at least your friends can come and join you while you're working. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is do luck perms, group, default, permission, set, spawn.spawn. That's good. And then we are going to decide where we want our new players to come in when they start the server. So, I don't know, the spawn is so big, I really can just place them anywhere. I don't want them to just run out. I want them to be able to view the rules of the server and whatnot first. So, I think maybe what I'm going to do is just kind of block them in back here first, and then we'll build up a wall or something that they can read the server rules on first. So we're going to go back here and go set spawn. Okay, and now what happens is if we do /spawn, waits a few seconds, and there we go. Okay, so you've learned a little bit about permissions, you've learned a little bit about configuring plugins, and how important it is to have a spawn set so your players don't just randomly start in the wild. I think that's a good place to wrap up for tonight. In the meantime, our next episode is going to focus on adding additional plugins to make the user experience much better on the server. So until then, this is SamLander34, signing off.